today we're here to talk about the NFT marketplace and the metaverse. And we're very honored to have as our first speaker, Professor Michael Mainelli, who co-founded ZYN, the leading think tank in the City of London in 1994. And ZYN has, among their many achievements, is renowned for its global financial, green finance, and smart centers indexes. I go to those indexes from time to time when I need to find out. I have the habit of doing ranking of whatever I'm researching on, and I go to those indexes very often. So, Professor Mainelli, Michael, could you start off telling us about what is the metaverse and where is it going? Where does it come from? And over to you, Michael.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Carson. I've been asked to speak for about 6 minutes on the metaverse, really as a prelude to continuing as to why this is relevant for NFTs, and then on to some of the legal issues surrounding them, and maybe some speculations on the market. The metaverse as a concept has been a staple of science fiction since the 1980s. The specific use of the term metaverse dates to 1992, when a friend of mine, the science fiction author Neil Stephenson, wrote it up in a book of his, Snow Crash, which is a very exciting book, and it became a fairly common Hollywood trope. Many of you will have seen The Matrix, for example, or other films featuring ideas of the metaverse. The common theme linking all of these types of stories is the metaverse as a persistent shared space. And I would emphasize that word persistent. We've had virtual reality mock-ups really since the 60s and 70s. I, in fact, began working in computer graphics in 1976. So that's been around, but it's the persistence that's there. And therefore it combines virtual reality, augmented reality, and obviously it uses the internet. And in many ways, art imitates life, and the metaverse has already been with us for some time. Those of you with children will have heard of Fortnite. Fortnite is a 3D online multiplayer game. It's set on a virtual island where gangs of children run around shooting each other. It has 350 million users worldwide. And last year, the singer Ariana Grande followed in the footsteps of a number of other performers by hosting a live concert with Fortnite as her platform. It is estimated that the concert was attended by over 12 million people, with millions more watching recordings after the event. And these events are different from television broadcasts, as the attendees view them through the eyes of an avatar. And for those with the right equipment, it is like being present at a live gig. And despite Fortnite being free to access, that single event is estimated to have earned the singer over $20 million in merchandise sales. So to reiterate, the metaverse is real, with us now, and people are making money out of it. And that keyword, unlike all of the other things to do with VR and AR, it's the persistent. You can go back and connect to it. However, before you start looking up at the next .com boom, this particular patch of magic beans comes with a few caveats. The metaverse as it currently exists is not yet a universal construct, but a series of walled gardens. These are closed ecosystems, and it's very different, therefore, from the open ecosystems we're used to in much of the internet. It's in the interest of the ecosystem operator to discourage users from going elsewhere. So the very principle that lies at the heart of the web, which is universal connectivity, is absent or decidedly weak. The second issue is that the innovations which make the metaverse possibly restrict access themselves. You need high bandwidth, low network latency, and high stability. And these are significant issues for users in developing nations, remote rural areas, etc. And the third issue is that of functionality versus aesthetics. The crisp 3D graphics, the Dolby surround sound, and lifelike avatars are really important for video games and music events, but are they actually essential for other applications, particularly commercial ones, such as banking or things like that? So in this respect, I personally believe it's likely that rather than replacing the World Wide Web, the metaverse will just sit alongside it. There's a final issue, and that's of casual access. Currently, you can access the internet through a range of devices, mobile phones, computers, etc., from your office, your bedroom, or a cafe. But for the full metaverse experience, you need a VR headset and haptic gloves. It's bulky and expensive, and it can cause some motion sickness for some users, but it can only be used in a safe environment. You can't really be waiting at a bus stop and then wandering around into the street in this virtual world. On applications, I've already mentioned entertainment, music events. We could have interactive live plays, tours of galleries and museums. E-commerce is starting to accelerate. Sotheby's, for example, opened a branch in the metaverse in response to interest in the sale of non-fungible tokens, NFTs, and sites such as Decentraland are even offering virtual real estate. Business meetings, possible application, and Microsoft and several other organizations are exploring next generation VR and telepresence, so that the Zoom meeting we're having today might in a few years be a metaverse meeting. But there are actually a lot of existing specialist applications, particularly in advanced modeling, simulation, medical training, loss adjustment, disaster management, maintenance. There actually are deep areas where people need these sorts of haptic technologies, principally to cover distance. So conducting specialist affairs over long distances. Now, when we look at businesses who are trying to look at this, I think there are a couple of implications. The first is I spoke about connectivity, but I think the second is it is likely to change notions of space and distance. There is, in fact, a lot of land grab going on. Mark Twain, back a century ago, said, "Buy land, they aren't making it anymore." Well, they are making a lot of land, and the difficulty here is it's understanding what are these new worlds, what are these new geographies. And if you followed Mark Twain's advice, you'd be out doing the equivalent of what we did when the World Wide Web began, which is all the .com domain name grabs. But it's going to be more complicated than that because there are many potential geographies for many different communities. I think the other thing we might want to think about is that the semblance of quality is going to be king. A lot of the competition now will be at the front end rather than the back end. It's not whether you can do something, I assume that, but does your look and feel really work for me? And that might mean, for example, that safety and security considerations could take a back seat. And there are some genuine safety considerations. Putting a VR headset on is tantamount to putting a polygraph on your forehead. And I think you're going to be seeing a lot of tracking. So people who are concerned about privacy, tracking, etc., have got to start considering a lot of that. Well, I'll close by saying, there are a lot of widely diverging views on the metaverse. In October last year, Mark Zuckerberg changed the name of Facebook to Meta, stating, "We are at the beginning of the next chapter for the internet, and is the next chapter for our company too." The next platform will be even more immersive, an embodied internet where you're in the experience and not just looking at it. We call this the metaverse, and it will touch every product we've built. So that's kind of at one extreme, and quite neat to see Mark Zuckerberg attempt to appropriate his coining of the phrase metaverse. But then at the other extreme, you've probably got people like me who feel that it's a useful adjunct to the existing internet, perhaps very useful in many areas. But we're here to discuss, I think, later NFTs. And so I'll close there if I may, Carson. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you very much. I'll come back to you. And Finlay, we are also very privileged to have Finlay Gupta, who is the founder and CEO of Material. Finlay was a leading figure in the blockchain space, having coordinated the launch of Ethereum back in 2015. And Finlay has also been the architect, the national blockchain strategy for Dubai. And he's also a strategic architect for consensus systems. And you have a very long CV, Finlay, so I'll stop here and ask you, we had an earlier conversation about where you see the future the metaverse will be and what are the use cases. And so over to you.
So the overriding imperative for our age is to figure out how we share one planet. We have 8 billion people, we have 200 or so countries, and we have very little international regulation which has any ability to limit the damage that we do by running the economy in the current configuration. So what I see the potential of the blockchain as being is essentially the global bureaucracy for helping us to implement global policy. So if we want to agree some kind of strict binding targets for CO2 emissions, this has been tried several times with the nation states as primary actors. And the problem is that the nation states are unwilling to do accurate carbon accounting. Michael has told the story of the collapse of the previous carbon markets in gory detail. And it's just very clear that unless we have a new kind of data systems, it's going to be very, very hard to coordinate international action on climate. So to get there, we need a world model that basically allows everybody to look at everybody else's emissions and everybody to look at everybody else's carbon trading. We need global transparency in data systems that are capable of handling the sort of integrity requirements that international treaties with real economic consequences would impose. And I think blockchain is basically the only candidate technology for running those kinds of global databases so that we can start to impose some kind of top-down order on the global economy before the global economy breaks the global climate. Now, this is a very new kind of problem. Up until relatively recently, international treaties have largely been sort of tied to enforcement mechanisms that included things like international inspectors flying around to look at the problem. But because the carbon situation is so deeply embedded and so pervasive, if we're going to see some kind of large-scale management of carbon globally, the approach has to be much more data-centric and much more automated. How do we look at a country's, for example, energy grid and assess whether or not what they're telling us about the carbon emissions happens to be true or whether they're bending the numbers? And if you have a position where all of the data that justifies a claim to a certain level of CO2 emissions is on chain, it's examinable, you have the potential to generate the kind of transparency that's necessary to bring real teeth to the international agreements which are currently being made about climate. Now, climate is not the only problem that we face globally that has this kind of data-driven pervasive quality. Another example is the what you could refer to as the take, make, waste cycle. So, industrial manufacturing, you pull resources out of the earth, you mash them in a factory, you turn them into a product. The product then goes out into the marketplace, is used for some number of years, or is immediately thrown away. But in all cases, it winds up in landfill. And we don't have the incentives in place to manufacture goods which are extremely durable. Everything is, incentivized for cheapest possible disposal, and most companies are making their money from the turnover of goods rather than from sort of long-term service contracts. And the result of that is that we have an economy which is just completely misgeared to the underlying planetary situation that we're in. So if you have data records which are bound to physical goods and which last as long as those physical goods last, and those data records are transferable between the various individuals that might own the goods over the course of the goods lifespan. And here, for example, houses typically have very long histories, both in the past and in the future. So you can imagine that if we had durable data records for real estate, those records would be useful for every buyer of the house, long into the future. So this is an approach where the physical objects are bound to persistent data records. This then enables economic circularity. We have an object, we use an object. When it's time to pass the object on, we take it to a third party, they update the data records so the current condition of the object is reported. You then take those objects and you put them back into the supply. so that they can go and find another user. And as long as the original manufacturer of those objects is being paid, for example, for the recertification when they come in and re-examine the goods and update the data records, it should in theory be as profitable for them to operate fleets of property in this way as to be continuing to manufacture things which are intended to move directly into landfill. And that as an approach, the data record plus the shift in the incentives moves the engineering to be towards goods which have the longest possible service life and which can be transferred from person to person to person indefinitely. And this kind of approach, I think, has the possibility of radically reducing the environmental footprint of maintaining a lifestyle of a given quality. For most folks in the developed world, actually stuff is kind of more of a problem than a solution. They typically have houses which are packed with things that they bought and used that solved a problem they had. And those things kind of fall into this uncanny valley where they're too valuable to throw away, but they're not worth enough money for it to be worth the inconvenience of selling them. And for goods in that kind of category, too expensive to throw away and too cheap to sell, they just become clutter, right? The attics, the garages, and the basements of the world are filled with this kind of material because it's dramatically easier to buy something than it is to sell it. It's almost easier to have things delivered to you than it is to take them out and throw them away, because capitalism has optimized itself for the delivery of goods rather than for the long-term management of goods or the removal of goods when they're no longer wanted. So if we make selling as easy as buying, then all of this manufactured material, which is currently clogging our systems, begins to go back into productivity. And the goods which are manufactured in this kind of circular regime, because they have the data records embedded, they have the ability to loop through the economy over and over again. And every time that happens, we're displacing primary resource consumption. So from my perspective, the blockchain is the natural way of creating and maintaining data records about physical objects, which will last as long as the physical objects themselves will, or longer. And also it provides the kind of international transparency that would be necessary for getting the sorts of really serious low-level agreements on climate which are necessary, detailed agreements, to be able to start reshaping the global economy to make it more compatible with long-term human welfare.
Yeah, Fine, we are on the United Nations panel, and Sustainable Development Goals. The blockchain apparently will help us fulfill the SDGs, by having data transparency and all the things that you talk about. It's very good that we are actually speaking at the UN panel, and that is what the UN is about today. SDGs, but from the ESCAP perception, the SDGs will not be achieved because of the data available today. We know that the Sustainable Development Goals, at least so far as Asia is concerned, will not be achieved. We are already too late. There's no way to achieve those. I'm just passing over the panels to you. And perhaps having the blockchain, the data transparency that goes with it, we could get to the SDGs, even a few years late, but not never. But thank you very much. Finley, I'll come back to you on another perspective. And we also have today, and I thank Paul Camuso for joining us today. He's now in Los Angeles, and it's something like 1 o'clock in his morning. Paul has spent the past 25 years as a business partner of William Shatner, and is a producer in the entertainment industry. He is also, as you might know, the minter of 250,000 NFTs. And Paul, that is a tour de grace, tour de force, having achieved so much in the NFT space. Can you tell us what the NFTs are? What are their roles in the metaverse and in this brave new world that we're walking into?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. My esteemed colleagues, I've already sort of gone through the metaverse itself, but an NFT can be something as simple as a record. It doesn't have to be anything more complicated than that. As Vinay pointed out, lots of the records and data that gets collected can be stored on the blockchain. It may be stored in the form of an NFT or as a record. Within the world of NFTs, however, there's lots of different things that you can do with them. I'm also a co-founder of a new company. It's called Orange Comet. And Orange Comet, we are all about creative. We come from the Hollywood space, and we are bringing Hollywood into the blockchain by repurposing and reestablishing lots of different famous IP. We've just brought the Walking Dead to the NFT world. So basically what happens with those NFTs is that they are more of a collectible. So coming out of the sort of the business acumen of what Vinay is doing, and sort of becoming into more of the digital collectibles. They have a new form of collectibles. So before, prior to the blockchain, people used to collect items like, you could collect action figures, and you could collect a whole bunch of different things, and they became cluttered within your house, as Vinay was talking about with clutter. With NFTs, however, they are the new collectibles, so they can actually be created on a blockchain in an electronic format, and then stored, collected, traded, sold, and invested in. An NFT basically is a digital collectible that has a very unique electronic signature that is actually put onto the blockchain. It's recorded in an immutable fashion on the blockchain that makes it unique and stands out for I'm sorry, it says my connection's unstable. So if I'm unstable, and it frees up, sorry. For an NFT, it's you can actually create anything basically. It could be as simple as a photo. You can store your photos as an NFT. For collectibles, you can store clips. What a lot of you've heard of. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of the Bored Ape Yacht Club. The Bored Ape Yacht Club is a series of generative pieces of pictures of 2D apes that are collectible, and they've become very famous. They've become very expensive. So within the NFT world, you've got these very unique opportunities to create first digital collectibles, but then what those collectibles can do is they could be metaverse ready or metaverse applicable. So what you can do is, say you have a Bored Ape Yacht Club NFT, it's a 2D piece. You could actually bring that into a metaverse, and that's what they've just done. They've just announced the Bored Apes metaverse, for the Bored Ape Yacht Club metaverse. And basically what's going to happen is that NFT that you hold is going to become some sort of a character within the metaverse. So it's going to take on probably a 3D format. And again, as Michael said, you'll be able to put on your goggles, and you'll be able to interact with your ape within a world that's filled with other denizens and other owners of similar pieces. And the idea is that it becomes sort of a social platform. Trying to explain the metaverse to people nowadays is about as complicated as trying to explain Facebook or Twitter to someone from like the 1970s or the 1980s. It's sort of that weird, mind-blowing experience where all of a sudden you're saying, okay, I am going to be now in a virtual community where I can sit at home like the Matrix and put on a pair of goggles and log in to that world. And that's exactly where it's going. We've seen with the current pandemic, Zoom, which is what we're on today, becomes super popular as a way to keep connections and to interact with not only your coworkers, but your family and your friends that you couldn't see during the pandemic. So with that, you will have an avatar. Many people who are on Facebook have their pictures that they change constantly. That same idea represents you in a social platform that becomes more of a way to interact in everyday life. Will it replace everyday life? I don't know. I mean, when the internet first started, lots of people became obsessed with it. They became so obsessed with the internet that they sort of forgot about their regular lives, and that became a problem. I don't know if the metaverse is going to become that problem. I mean, we have seen lots of the different. We've got Minecraft by Microsoft, and that's a completely fictionalized world because everything is blocked. So it's definitely not a reality, but people, and people do live there and play games, and they're constantly, there are channels that are online that people just sit there and watch other people playing it, which is kind of an odd concept, but it works. So within this realm, I think that what you'll find is that if you had an item that you use in everyday life, those items will also be available in the metaverse. In talking, we have a client who's a very famous Swiss watchmaker. His watches they start at $400,000. He actually wants to create a store in the metaverse. He wants to be able to sell NFT representations of his crazy watches. They're amazing designs to people in the metaverse to make the metaverse ready. And that's where things are going. You've seen, with NFTs, you've seen like McDonald's, you've seen Walmart. It's not a fad. I mean, lots of people sit there saying, well, they're a fad, they're this, they're that. No, they really aren't. I mean, once you get McDonald's and Walmart and these basic core businesses that serve, the general populace getting into this world, you absolutely find that, that this is not a fad. This is something that's happening. This is something that's going places. Now, what it's going to end up looking like, I don't know. I mean, as Michael said, everybody, it's a walled garden. So everybody creates their own version of the metaverse. So you have Fortnite, you've got Minecraft, you've got Vox. You've got all different, and within the metaverse, there's Decentraland, as Michael talked about. There's also the sandbox. The sandbox is another sort of squared off character figure that people gather in, and lots of very famous, like Ariana Grande, who did Fortnite, lots of famous musicians hold concerts in the sandbox. Snoop Dogg, who's one of the partners in my company, actually has held several concerts in the sandbox. And again, it's crazy to think about it, but people tune into that, and it's like being there. And people who can't get out, whether it's because of the pandemic or because that they live in an area that's sort of remote, they can don those goggles and they can become part of the bigger world at hand. And I think that's where the metaverse is going to actually show its true nature, and the idea of social interaction. And again, we'll see what happens, but I think that definitely with NFTs and with the metaverse, that we will see a form of our own lives happen within a realm within a very short time.
Thank you, Paul. You've spent so much time in the entertainment industry. Yesterday, the chairman of what is called Asia Television of Hong Kong, has been like a 60-year-old television station. She came and said, now I want to build ATV into a metaverse. And I thought, wow, it's a good idea. That in the end, with the library of all the drama series that everyone in Asia has been, particularly Hong Kong, Southeast Asia, mainland China, they all grew up with watching ATV. And now she wants to turn that into a metaverse. And perhaps later on I can pick your brains on how that could happen and what to do with it. I'll be back with you. And we're also very pleased to have Henry Kreis, Henry, with us. Henry has been researching cryptocurrency, crypto assets since 2014, while spotting parallels in quantum graffiti and directed acrylic drafts. Henry, you have to explain to me what those mean. But then he stumbled into cryptocurrency and has been researching that as a theoretical physicist since then. And he does a lot of research work on blockchain technology, cryptocurrency, network theory, etc. with Imperial College. So Henry, welcome here. And can you add on to what our panelists have talked about in terms of metaverse and NFT, and give us your perspective, the youngest among us all, on this subject?
My career is a lot less long as illustrious, but yeah, my sort of method or way of working is that I came in reverse. So I came from physics into directed acyclic graphs, which ended up being blockchains, and I've been trying to learn finance the opposite way from like a crypto native. Which has done me some good, but that's I'm kind of semi-focused on regulations and what's fundamentals here. So I would just add that, and I don't want to be the negative one. So there's things about regulations, there's things about identity, and there's things about fundamentally what is the technology. And no one here has mentioned the word smart contract, which I think is kind of fundamental to understanding what's going on here. And what is a smart contract? It's not that smart actually, but well, it could be. But it's a negotiation between two decentralized counterparties. I mean, the easiest one is a DEX, a decentralized exchange, where I put an item here, and if the conditions met, so I put my dollars here, probably it has to be tokenized. I put my Ethereum here, or my thing I want, and if equal, as in if the conditions are met for the contract, the exchange happens. So the smart contract can mediate exchange in a decentralized way. There isn't a counterparty sitting there. The other thing it can do is say with these NFT contracts is rather than having non-fungible, just means you can't split it up into lots of pieces like the standard cryptocurrencies. It would allow you to exchange again dollars for a piece of thing that had a unique index in the smart contract, and then that can be traded like in a secondary market. But what you then have to think about is like, what does that mean legally and regulation wise, which again is why I'm kind of stripping over there. What do you actually own? And I think if you look at how the CryptoPunks and some of the more famous ones have done, and in Bored Apes more recently, you actually own the IP to the image which you have. So you can then set up, as I said, like almost use that image to do secondary branding. But I think when there's a lot of projects starting, it's like, okay, well, so you've bought this NFT, what do you legally own, and in what jurisdictions does that have meaning as well? So we have to then consider, okay, so like Vinay also said, like, oh, there's accountability, but if that isn't well defined in legal terms, you don't own anything. You just own a record on the blockchain. So again, the second stage I would say is bridging the traditional legal world or the finance world into this space. So these decentralized exchanges have meaning and they're kind of fully valid, and they're not, as again, the big problem with this is kind of retail investors and people kind of getting into things that they don't fully understand the instruments of. Or with the NFTs, you're buying an NFT, but the actual underlying isn't legally sound in the sense of you don't know what you're actually owning. So what is the utility? And these all things have to be worked out kind of by experiment and negotiation. But I would say the whole history of blockchain from a sense of crowdfunding or sourcing capital is kind of a type of open finance. It's very interesting because it's open. It's a bit like, oh, anyone from anywhere can be involved in a project. It's a call to action. You can invest in NFTs, you can invest in tokens. Yeah, however, it is fully open. And again, like Vinay said, in reverse to what he said, with the transparency and the irreversibility, it is fully transparent and irreversible. So if someone was to say, go into the metaverse and be scammed out of their money, they wouldn't be able to reverse said transaction because that's the nature of the whole thing. So again, I think just in summary, let's kind of think about, okay, the underlying technologies. I'm sure some of the audience would like to get into that. Again, learn how to build a smart contract. What is it mediating? What is it? An NFT is, to be honest, is a dictionary of records. It says, oh, this index of token is owned by this address. And again, you need to learn a bit about public and private key cryptography, but it really is just a record. It says, oh, Carson Wen owns index 1, Paul owns index 2, Michael owns index 3, and it's pretty much like that. And then there's another piece of code that says, oh, Paul gives his over to here. So now Carson owns number 3 and number 1, for example. But that's the mechanics. So again, people need to understand what the mechanics are, but that will be well hidden. Like again, Michael said, it will be about the look and feel. The second part is like the identity, and how do you actually link identities to these things, which again, it could be dangerous from a perspective, but also it could not. You need to basically, if you're starting to conduct exchange in that manner, or trying to record some levels of finance, it needs to be the right counterparties with the right level of experience for certain things, or even the right jurisdiction. So again, I don't think the metaverse can stay completely separated from reality forever. And then the third part is, as I said, the irreversibility. But overarching all of this in a positive way is the fact that it's fully open finance. So there's lots of unique opportunities for people to start. As I said, I would like to start little businesses in the metaverse. It would be really interesting. There's also things in the game world, which is like vast a market for things like this. So Axie is one of the most famous ones, where they basically ended up creating economies for other groups in other countries to basically play the game, earn a yield. And they are real economies. So you can go out, train your Axie, fight them, do stuff like this, and you earn real capital. And they're like called guilds and things like this. So I imagine, the more and more these game worlds develop, the more real money you could earn in there. So it could become mini careers, or at least you could definitely meet interesting people across countries and kind of pay them for work done, even within a circular system like a game world, or open systems like Vinay was saying with a watch shop. So that's kind of my take on the situation.
Thank you. There has been a lot of knowledge and information being given by the panelists here today. And I'm sure the members of the task force on Pedro's task force, the young, the female people that they would like to be able to assist in making, in finding a way to the future. Given all that is said today, I'm sure this will be, what is recorded will be something that would provide a lot of guidance to those who visit. I see that our time is actually up. We have spent 45 minutes with experts talking on different areas. I don't know whether any of the panelists have questions to ask each other after hearing all the perceptive, visionary, and analytical information. What Henry mentioned is extremely analytical. As always, I only understand half of what he tells me.
Well,
so
I only understand half of it.
I might have a question for Paul, if you don't mind.
Please, Michael.
Paul, I mean, at the moment, NFTs are kind of a wild west, and we are, by any sort of normal person's standards, we're seeing completely irrational price behavior. I personally think that there might be a low-level, enduring NFT market, the equivalent of baseball cards or tokens or vouchers or memorabilia, which might rocket at some point. But some of the art stuff I'm seeing, it just doesn't make any sense. Why do I want a digital copy of art that I can't use in any way? Do you see this market persisting like this? Do you see the low level happening, or am I completely wrong and there's going to be huge amounts of variability all the time?
No, I think, Michael, I think that you have hit on something. I think at the end of the day, like with anything in the real world, creative is king. And, and a lot of these very, like how many Bored Ape Yacht Club knockoffs are there out there? I don't understand it. I don't understand why people keep producing them, because they're never going to equal what the Bored Ape Yacht Club has achieved. And again, even those are highly inflated. I think we've seen the prices change wildly. But I do think that within the collectors world, the collectible world, Michael, has been around forever. It's been around since the 50s, if not even before that. So I think that collecting is here to stay. Whether it becomes, whether we end up switching from physical to digital, I don't know if that's going to take a while. But I do think I do see that there absolutely is a want, a need, et cetera, especially with the youth of today. They're not into material goods, they're into these digital goods. And that's sort of a very hard concept for people who are older, like myself, who, who would rather have an item, put it on a shelf, touch it, feel it, etc. Kids today, like even with records, CDs, etc. I mean, all of that's now digital. It's like you don't have anything. You've got you've got a device that you can show stuff on. Now, with the digital art, Samsung for its 2022 television sets actually offer the ability to display NFTs. So you could actually take a Samsung television, actually frame it all up like a true piece of art, put it on the wall and display artistic NFTs that are to your liking. So there is a little bit of of that happening in real life that I don't know if it's a fad or if it's not. I mean, there's digital frames. I just attended Bitcoin Miami, and you would think that in a Bitcoin where they're talking about money, that they really wouldn't have much of anything other than for finance, etc. There were a lot of like digital frame companies being, showing off like, you can buy this, yes, you can buy with your Bitcoin these pieces of art and you can display them here. So I don't know if, I don't know how long it's going to take, but I do see that sort of the trend is going towards digital.
Thank you.
Is that okay for you, Michael?
Yes, no, very helpful.
Thank you. Do you have anything else to ask of the other panelists? Michael, there was a conversation that I had with Finney, where Finney said, it's not only young people who will go to the metaverse, who play with NFTs, it's really the older guys. Memories. Finney would say metaverse is a place where people go for their memories. If I want to remember the Hong Kong of 1970s that I grew up on, the street side stores and all that, I go into a metaverse back with the scenery of the 1970s and see myself there. Do I get to right, Finney?
Yes, absolutely.
We did a report. We did a report in January called Pixel Perfect, looking at the metaverse and insurance. And I must say, you both got a very good point there. One of the big application areas was with the elderly, and it ranged from potentially, it's not proven by any means, but potentially Alzheimer and memory, assistance really, to just therapy. Lovely little system we saw called a Whiz Dish, which is a circular platform that you can walk on easily. That sounds fine. And then the elderly people were putting goggles on and taking walks. Instead of in their treatment center, they were walking genuinely along the cliffs of Wales. And then they started ringing up and connecting with other elderly people in different homes, hundreds of miles away. So now we're taking a walk together. And then it got even funnier, which is that the government of Wales apparently paid WizDish to create more environments that recreated Wales to promote Wales. So you had advertising as being the geography itself. So really quite an interesting set of applications we came across. So yes, there are a lot. And I don't see the metaverse as a young thing or an old thing. I must say, even if you look at video gaming, that's starting to transit into a variety of age groups. And the numbers that we have on a lot of this from market researcher are pretty dubious. In fact, if you were to strictly look at the market research numbers, you would actually conclude that most video game users are in their 40s because those are the people who purchase the games. So who are we to say that because they purchased the games, they only gave them to their children? So it's an interesting bit there. So there's a lot of presumption about who's doing what at what age group.
Yes.
Well,
I do think
I think the thing with nostalgia and the past, we put about 100 people through their first VR experience, and what we discovered was that the first place that anybody went in VR was home. Google Earth is this very powerful mapping application, and it shows these fantastically detailed versions of the planet. And people didn't go and see the Grand Canyon, they didn't go and see the Eiffel Tower, they didn't go and see the towers in Dubai. The first thing they went to was either the place they live now or the place where they grew up as a kid. And similarly, in the terms of the kind of synthetic environments, the unreal places, the place we found people were most comfortable spending time was the deck of the Starship Enterprise, because they'd spent an enormous amount of time watching this thing. And I think that this is basically a kind of a harmonization and balance question, that because the medium is extremely unconventional, you wear a box on your head and you can see a thing that isn't there. The unconventional medium has to be paired with a very safe, reassuring message. Whereas the virtual reality environments, which are kind of strange and chaotic and bizarre and complex, I think they kind of overload people because you have both a very weird medium and a very weird message. So I think that the counterbalancing of things like nature environments in virtual reality, people are very comfortable in natural environments, but so much of the kind of hype around VR is about these kind of impossible cities, the imaginary worlds, the kind of neon and chrome fantasy universes. And I think that people are basically uncomfortable with that stuff, even if you put them in that situation in the real world. If you drop somebody from an American small town into the middle of, the most neon lit corner of Tokyo, the disorientation is massive. And most of the world still lives in villages. So I just have a feeling that when we get to VR, mass adoption, I think it's not going to be this kind of novelty generating thrill sort of, imaginary theme park. I think it's going to be something that is much, much, much lower to the ground and much more familiar, in the same way that television could show you anything, but a lot of what it shows you is the inside of other people's houses and occasionally hospitals. That's the kind of places where people like the setting of their movies. There's a little bit of science fiction at the edges, but the mainstream kind of soap opera format is a very, very fixed format. And I think this is what we'll find with virtual reality, that the mass adoption will be much more like, telenovelas than it will be like the latest Blade Runner movie.
Well, I was just wondering if anybody on the panel has experience with what's called AR, or augmented reality, because it's sort of, that's the blend between the two. So for me, I always imagine it was it Minority Report, where the guy has a scan of his eye and then they put, give him advertising. But again, that's the persistent metaverse, which is what Michael was talking about. That's can be a bit more interesting. So rather than your profile stays in Roblox or Minecraft, it then moves across, which is an engineering challenge, but just philosophically, what does it mean to have the Roblox characters in your bedroom? Or because Apple's invested tons of infrastructure in being able to show that. So I was just wondering if anyone has this kind of blended.
We're actually working on one of the IPs that we have is the classic science fiction show Lost in Space. So they have the Jupiter 2. And we're actually building, and the robot, yes, and the robot, Danger robot. So we're actually building an AR version of that to do as part of an NFT when we announce, we're going to be announcing it in probably a couple of weeks. But yeah, we are working a little bit in AR. I think the problem with AR right now is that it requires a device. And, and even with everyone has a phone, but like how much can you project with the phone? Because, the idea is that, you want to sort of create a scale. Right, you want to create a scale, but like you can only do it with a device. So you've got like, either pad or a phone, but it can only show a very limited view. So how do you show bigger, et cetera? And that's sort of, I think, maybe where the goggles will come in for AR. But for right now, the AR experience is usually a smart device.
Okay, Henry. Michael, do you have anything to add?
It's a bit like 3D TVs. I don't know if anyone ever bought those in the end. So I'm curious to whether, because to me, it seems about the right level is a device. I know it's good for checking whether your furniture fits in your house, but I do imagine, you wake up, there's nothing in your house, and then you can look exactly where your furniture should be.
10 years ago, I had a client who spent his whole fortune trying to develop 3D glasses, which obviously by now there's no market because it started so long ago. Spent his whole life as a scientist trying to do that. So life changes, things change so quickly. It may be that what we focus on probably will be overtaken by events somehow. And Finney, do you have anything more to add to today's discussions from the many insights that you have shared before.
So a colleague of mine is a science fiction author, Bruce Sterling, and he had a project called the Dead Media Project, where he looked at all of the kinds of media which have fallen out of use. You know, things like 78 records, or sort of magnetic tape, this kind of thing, cartridges. And what's interesting is how many generations of media we've gone through. Layer after layer after layer after layer of innovations. There was a time when audio was delivered on wires, right, instead of tape. So I think it's interesting to imagine, sort of as we look at this incoming technology, imagining the technology that comes after that technology. If we think of virtual reality as being a thing which is accessed through goggles, what displaces that? You think predictably over the next, say, 10, 20 years, the goggles will get thinner and thinner and thinner. They'll eventually wind up being sort of built into your glasses, blah, 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 blah. And then you sort of think, well, what comes after that? And I think the only thing that I can see that might come after those kind of, sort of perfect high-tech goggles is something that interfaces directly with the brain. And so in some ways, I think of virtual reality as being sort of the last human technology, because when you take the glasses off, you're a good old-fashioned unaugmented monkey. But the technology that comes after virtual reality will probably be directly embedded into the brain. And at this point, we're in the beginning of the cyborg age. So, I just want to leave people with this notion that, this is sort of virtual reality is the last human technology. Augmented reality is the last human technology. The thing that comes after that is the beginning of the cyborg age. And, as somebody said on Twitter, when that game begins, when the transhumanist game begins, it starts with a chip in your head and it ends with it starts with a chip in your brain and it winds up with your brain in a chip.
Let our friends at the UN see what the Brave New World is all about, and to plan for the future. Probably not many people would have the insight of the panel today on what are going to happen in the years to come. Michael, would you have any closing comments for us on the discussions, into many different aspects of where the metaverse is going?
Well, I guess, Carson, it's difficult to compress it down, but I do think that we're going to go through a ride as society in the same way that we did over the internet itself in many regards. If you those of us old enough to remember, I mean, I'm on the net since '76, and between '76 and about '96, I was the dinner party bore, because I would talk about the world where emails would go and this and that, and everybody just stare at me and laugh at me. And then suddenly about '96, '97, people were telling me, don't you get with it on this email stuff. I still remember rather amusingly somebody, when I told them that I had put up a Hotmail account, I began to sort of sidle away, and I realized that they had a slightly different spelling of mail than I had. So they looked up my account. So you have this sort of whole societal change. We've seen this now for really now for a quarter of a century, and I think we're going to go through a similar one. Probably the turning point for me was, I think it was late last year, just after Zuckerberg did his grandiose statements. One of the best things I saw was the government of Iceland, and they put up an advertisement. They said, "Come to Icelandverse. You don't need VR goggles. You don't need 3D glasses. The great thing is it's all real reality." And I think we're just going to be mishmashing this, and it's quite possible that if you look at the internet as a term, originally it was a fairly technical term. It meant the connectivity behind it, the TCP/IP protocols, etc. And now it's sort of just a general phrase for all that stuff and connectivity and computing. And I think the metaverse might well become kind of like that, just a general term for all that visual 3D kind of stuff that we do.
That's a very wide and embracive definition of the metaverse. That in fact, I have something like a metaverse on my background that must be taken from the sandbox or something like that. And Henry, do you have any more to add?
I think just to close, like with what I was thinking in the end, I think, so what I opening statement and kind of what follows, I think that because the panel's more for the youth, I would say the metaverse is going to need lawyers. It's going to need people to look at like how the legal structure works. I know you're a lawyer, so again, this is how people could train into that specialism. There's got front and back engineering. So there's people who need to understand smart contracts. There's people who don't. There's people who understand things like JavaScript, UI. Like how do you get involved in building what looks and feels really good? Like Michael said, that's going to be the distinguisher. There's people who, if you're interested in the back end, which is kind of more my side, the analytical, I guess, is what's a smart contract? What is it? Like how do you code one? Which blockchain is the best? Blah, blah, blah. You can get into all these arguments. And then the kind of the intersection of all this is kind of business. There's sort of game creation at the moment. Like you can get involved with guilds. There's real value creation. There's people who kind of pay money to have characters and be involved. You can actually breed these little characters and sell them as NFTs. That's like Axie model. But I would imagine this develops into basically a what would you call it? Like a economy with like global reach, but a new economy. So again, you could be selling watches, you could be selling little characters, you could be selling collectibles. You know, there's a storefront there which has global thing with all the regulatory caveats which I mentioned. But in general, if people want to get involved, you know, as I said, they're going to need all people to specialize in this. So again, if you think of an idea where you could use identity or immutable record keeping in a nice way, that's kind of where here. If you could think of a new idea where people could globally interact, yeah, any cool concepts, you know, which you think might lend themselves to blockchain applications or NFTs, you know, it could be a new medium for, I get loads of conversations with artists and musicians about how do they really monetize and create new revenue for themselves. Because at the moment they're very stuck. They get kind of stuck in certain platforms. So there might be even new opportunities there, you know, not just the live music markets or recorded music markets. It could be an experience market. So lots of opportunities for people to get involved, but and start at which level's good for your kind of talent set.
That's good advice for Pedro's task force members. And Paul, would you have anything for us to close this session with?
I actually think that with regard to NFTs, that I think the tipping point will be when things that you take, you know, you just take for granted in your everyday life, a driver's license, a title on an automobile. When those become NFTs, that's when the game changer happens.
Yes, yes. It's something for us all to think about. It's getting very late into your 2 o'clock, Paul. And I thank all our panelists for being here. And I hope the task force would then have this well recorded and distributed, and also for people to learn, for people of all ages to learn from the wisdom and insights that are being delivered today. Thank you.